Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome again to another segment on Spiritology. Uh, Today, I want to talk a little bit about positive thinking. What is what does it mean to be a positive thinker? We all know what positive thinking is supposed to accomplish, though. Um, it's a way of doing internal mental affirmations to talk ourselves into a better life, to talk ourselves into being more confident, happier, more at peace, even to be healthier and wealthier. Um, Positive thinking is that thing we do to ourselves to try to reverse any negative inclinations um, stemmed from our minds and that goes out into the world to affect our lives in bad ways. But when it comes to positive thinking, here's something kind of interesting. Whether you try to do thought imagery or affirmations or what have you, you may go and listen to inspirational speakers. But if you really look very closely, take a good look at the methodologies of trying to get yourself to think positive. They all have a common thread, and I think they call that common thread in the world of psychology um, stimulus response. So basically, we're using positive thinking to try to push buttons to make ourselves feel good about ourselves and to uplift our mentalities and be optimistic about our lives. And those triggered responses or stimuli, whatever you want to call it, um, they're button pushers. Button pushers can be external or internal. You can be feeling bad one moment, and a person that you like can show up, and all of a sudden you're feeling good because that person pushed a button internally, and it turned on all these feelings of elation, and you started thinking good thoughts. Likewise, you could think about that same person. That person doesn't even have to show up physically, and you will pretty much get the same response, feelings of elation or what have you, feeling good when you're thinking about that person. But what you're doing in both cases, you're still pushing buttons. And what's interesting about that is that that person that shows up can leave for that moment. He comes in and hangs out, or she comes in and hangs out with you for a period of time, and after which they leave, they go home or go back out of town or wherever they have to go, and you start feeling a little down. That person's absence, the thought of the person not being around, pushed a button, and you started feeling kind of bad, kind of sad. So, if you really think about it, we are somewhat like machines in a sense that we're trying to constantly push internal buttons or an internal button to keep ourselves constantly feeling good, but it doesn't work out so well. If you look at the way many people are these days, there's a lot of misery out there. There's a lot of misery. And it's because I think we have some erroneous ideas about positive thinking and what it's supposed to be. The thing about positive thinking is this: it has to be natural. It can't come from buttons, internal buttons that have to be pushed. And when you think about being natural, the only thing I say is you have to think about way back in the good old days when you were a child and you were happy and you were excited and you were glad to be alive every day. Every day was exciting. Every day was a new adventure. And, I'm talking about if you were a normal kid. I know that some children, and God forbid, they grow up in volatile environments and they're robbed immediately of their happiness. And heaven help their souls. But let's say you're a normal kid. You grew up in a normal household with loving parents, caring parents, and you understood what it meant to be naturally happy. It wasn't based on having money, clothes, or cars. For most of us, that kind of stuff didn't start until we were like teenagers, maybe, but you were just happy naturally. And the reason why that is because you did not have the emotional weight of the misery that you now have as an adult. If you're an adult, listen to this. But you were without the weight of that inner mental misery. And here's something kind of peculiar about the inner mental misery. We do things to push buttons and try to think positive to get rid of that mental misery. But the mental misery always seems to come back. It bounces back. It bounces back stronger than ever sometimes. Sometimes you go on a spew of positive thinking and then the misery comes back and you think to yourself, what's the use? It's futile. But why is that? Here's food for thought. Here's something to consider. Okay, let's rewind back when you were a small child. You had not a care in the world. You were happy go lucky, carefree, and just happy. Happiness was your natural state. But then over a period of time, you started being told that you had obligations. You had to, you had these obligations. You were given certain things and ideologies and pressures, and all that stuff was given to you, and you internalized all that. And you thought to yourself, with help, of course, from the people around you and your environment, that that's what you were and that's who you had to be. Whatever the pressures or the obligations were, whether you have to grow up and be somebody, you have to grow up and be like so and so, you have to be strong, you have to be courageous, you were already all that. You were already courageous, you were already strong, you were already somebody that could go out to the world and accomplish whatever you wanted to accomplish. But when you were given all the pressures, that made the implication that you weren't anybody. That gave you a faulty impression. And so you started to internalize all these pressures and you made that into what they call in psychology a psychological identity. So basically, you were taught into becoming misery. You were told, basically, although not directly, but you were basically told you must transform yourself, your natural personality, from happiness to misery. Hence, you became misery. And then fast forward to an adult, when you try to think positive, you can't pull it off for very long because misery is as misery does, and misery thinks miserable, evil, harmful thoughts. And that's who you are. And so now that you're misery, when you try to think positive, misery resists. Misery is saying, nah, no, no, no. I'm misery. I am miserable. This is who I am. So, in essence, when you think positive, it's like internally, subconsciously, you're saying, I'm trying to strip away my identity. I can't do that. If I strip away my identity, I'll be nothing, nobody. What will I be without my identity? Pretty intense when you think about it, huh? So you're walking around thinking that you're misery. I am misery. That's the internal program, if you will. I am misery. So when it comes to misery, all you can do is try to push psychological buttons. When it comes to misery being your identity, all you can do is push psychological buttons to try to get some kind of reprieve every now and then. Misery can't think positive. And that's the trouble most people have with positive thinking. That's why it's such a struggle. I know internally it's called, not internally, well, internally, yes, but I was raised in a religious environment, and it's part of what spiritual warfare was all about or is all about. And I remember being told you have to bear your cross just like Christ did. And basically, if you think about what that cross is, and by the way, the cross is a symbol for the church, and they display it pridefully, and it's like a badge of honor. But if you think about what the cross really is, what it represents the old ancient Roman oppression. It represents misery. So basically, I was told I have to bear my misery. I have I have a cross to bear. I have misery to bear. I have this identity that is misery that I have to bear. And what does it do? It keeps me miserable. It makes me anxious, afraid. It makes me it makes me irritable towards people, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. Because I got to thinking, well, I was told I have to bear a cross now. I have a cross to bear. We all have a cross to bear. That is, if you're of that particular faith. But the Messiah, he let the cross go. He took on, according to the Bible, the weight of the world, the sins of the world. But ultimately, he bare the cross for a brief period of time, and he rose up off the cross. He shed the cross. He let it go. and he was reborn, renewed. He had a new identity. And that's what I figured I had to do. I had to, as the Messiah did. I mean, let's face it, if gonna follow his example, gotta quit worshiping that cross. You gotta let it go. Gotta let go of that misery. Gotta rise up, ascend from that level of misery into a new identity. And here's the interesting part. The man also said, unless you come as a child, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but unless you come as a child, you will not be able to enter the kingdom of heaven, which is that original state we had when we were children anyway. So that's kind of ironic. However, when it comes to letting go of the cross, rising up off the cross, dismissing our misery, again, it's not so easy. Positive thinking just doesn't cut the mustard. It's only a temporary band-aid to a wound that could very well be festering for some of us. There's got to be something else. So here's another analogy. You have a radio or a stereo, I'm sure, and our misery can be likened unto a radio that's turned up. Let's say it has a volume dial from 1 to 10, and it's turned all the way up to 10, and it's constantly making all this noise. And at some point, you get tired of it. You get tired of it, and you just want to cut it off. I mean, does not your mind get loud and noisy and drive you crazy at times? Don't you sometimes just want to cut it off and have peace? Sometimes we can get distractions to where we're not thinking about our inner misery. We're focused on something outside of ourselves, and sometimes that serves to give us a little reprieve. But the loud, noisy mind is always there. It always comes back full blast. Some of us even can't sleep at night because of it. Some of us have nightmares when we do go to sleep. Some of us don't get restful sleep because we know that even when sleep, the mind is still doing its thing, being noisy, being loud, driving us crazy even while we sleep. So we don't even get restful sleep. And the key to it all is turning down the volume all the way to a point to where we can cut it off and be at peace. But how do you do that? Self-awareness. That's the answer. Becoming aware that your mind is noisy and becoming aware that your mind is taking you deeper and deeper into misery. Self-awareness. Now, self-awareness might not be what you think it is, because there's a thing called mental absorption that people mistake for self-awareness. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, I know my mind is riddled with anxiety. I know my mind is noisy and negative. Well, there's two types of knowing. There's conscious knowing and there's intellectual knowing. And to know intellectually is not enough. It, believing that you know something intellectually is like memorization. Conscious awareness is a little bit different. Actually, it's complete opposite. You're actually outside of your mind, watching it do its thing, as opposed to being inside of your mind, absorbed by it and being tortured by it. So we have to learn what it means to be self-aware. Nevertheless, we need to turn down that volume. And the books of Spiritology can show you an exact and precise methodology to do that. It's not an overnight process. This is some of the issues I have with gurus, self help gurus, ministers of the gospel. They tell you it's an instant process, and it's not, it's a gradual process. You have these people preaching to you, telling you you need to turn down the volume on that radio. All the while, these people, their volume on their radios are full blast. They're hypocrites. They don't know how to turn down the volume on their radios. Yet and still, they're saying this is what you must do to live victoriously. And they're right, but it just doesn't seem kosher that they do that and they're in positions of, let's say, leadership to where they should help people, but they should help people by being an example as opposed to a preacher. But again, the thing is to turn down the volume of that radio. And it's not an overnight process. It's not instantaneous. So if somebody ever tell you you're changed instantly, don't believe that. You're really not. If you believe that, then you're stuck right where you are. You'll be stuck because if my radio is full blast and then somebody tells me I'm changed and I buy into it and I'm still full blast, then guess what? That's the change from full blast to full blast. I've just diluted myself. So don't buy into it. Just be aware of yourself. Self awareness. Again, you won't be able to turn down that radio instantly. But with spiritology and the techniques of spiritology, you can turn that button from 10 to 9. And you just had a little subtle change. You just took one step toward peace of mind. Now, the difference between 9 and 10, it's so subtle you might not notice it, but the change is there. The volume did go down. And then you work with spiritology some more, and now you're down to 8. Now you're down to 8. And you're like, okay, you go out into the world and certain things don't bother you like they used to. Certain little things don't irritate you like they used to. And you notice a little subtle change like that, little subtle changes. You work with the principles a little bit more. Now you're down to 7. Then you're down to 6. Then to 5. And at that point, you can feel a definite difference within your inner state. At that point, you know you're headed in the right direction. and you really understand, okay, all I need to do is just continue to work with this and I can take it all the way. And at that point, guess what? True, natural, positivity comes to you. Not the kind of positivity that has to be generated from your misery, which is false positivity, which is fraudulent positivity, but true positivity that springs up from a place that you had when you were a child, which is your true identity. And as you work more with the principles of spiritology, and as that inner place that you had as a child works in conjunction with spiritology, guess what? Now you're down to 4, then 3, and 2, then 1. And one day that magical moment happens when you turn that radio off. And at that point, you are peaceful. Again, as a child, you have that natural state of happiness that is not based upon anything outside of yourself. It's not based upon anything worldly. It's not based upon money. It's not based upon cars, other people. You'll still enjoy those things, but you'll enjoy those things in the right way because you're back to yourself, your real self. You rose up off the cross. You ascended. Spiritology can help out. It can show you the way to turn down that radio. It can show you the way to release that cross, to restore your true identity from misery, this misery that the world gave you, back to happiness, the natural happiness that stems directly from the presence of God. In the meantime, what you can do is see, observe for yourself that everything that I said is true. Be a student of your own mind. Watch your mind in action. See what it does, see how it operates. It'll be good for you. But again, thank you for listening. And God bless. If it pleases you, join, subscribe to the Spiritology Television Network, and I'll be posting more of these videos. Also, I'd like to get 1,000 likes for the Church of Spiritology page on Facebook because I want to start reading from the Spiritology books and show y'all the techniques of turning down the volume on that radio, rising up off that cross of misery, shedding that cross as the Messiah did. Receiving and achieving your new nature. Again, God bless, and thank you for listening.